Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending where you are in the world right now. And welcome to today's webinar, Data Visualization Design Discussion Lab. My name is Jessica Cook. I'm the Community Content Manager for Power BI, Power Apps, and Microsoft Flow, and I'll be your host today. Our presenter is Miranda Lee, Design and Data Visualization Lead at Microsoft. Miranda evangelizes data visualization design best practices and storytelling through webinars, blogging, coaching, and conducting joint projects with internal Microsoft employees. So today we're going to look at two examples of visualizations and talk about ways to present the data effectively. Active participation is highly encouraged in this webinar. We want it to be very interactive, so please feel free to share questions and comments in the YouTube chat, and I will pass those on to Miranda. So with that, let's get started. Thanks for being here today, Miranda.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm really thrilled to be here today. As Jessica mentioned, I do a lot of teaching internally to our employees. So I always try to experiment different format and see what works and what doesn't. As I try to do this experiment, I also reflect to myself on how I personally learned. So that's kind of the reason I wanted to host this inspiration lab. And talk about how I learned and how you could possibly get some inspiration from what I get inspiration from. So let's give some feedback. Maybe after the session you can give us some feedback and see if this is helpful for you. So the first thing I want to talk about is really the misperception about data visualization design. So whenever you're thinking, people talk about, I want to design my data visualization. I want a designer to help me out. So a lot of people think about graphic design. Just make the visualization more beautiful, which is actually very narrow in terms of design. This is only one of the very different aspects of visualization design. So I was thinking, instead of thinking about yourself as a graphic designer or make it beautiful, you're thinking about a painter, like a house, you're thinking about an interior designer or a painter who come in paint outside of your house. They can make it pretty, but that doesn't really change the functionality of your house. If it doesn't fit your business need, if it doesn't fit your family need, your house still doesn't fit your family need. It doesn't matter how pretty it is, right? So I thought, instead of thinking about yourself as a graphic designer or interior designer or painter, think about yourself as the architect for a house. Thinking about your workflow can really mirror what the architect do to design your house. First they will evaluate, okay, what's your family is living scenario? What kind of lifestyle you have? Do you like outdoor? Do you like indoor? Do you like entertainment? How do you want the space to be designed so that your family can enjoy the space that needed? So that really kind of come down to, first you have to understand the family who's going to live here. And then, you're thinking about the structure, the foundation, and how do you get all the materials together to build this structure? And then you can think about the painting the house outside the house or painting inside the house or decorate it if you want it to be a little bit more cozy and pretty, right? So there's a lot of things that involve with visualization design. Here I actually laid out several big blocks. First, you think about data design is really, how do you identify the problems of your users, and your analytical process, how you draw your how you kind of laid out your layout, your structure. And then there's a little technical session of the design is really the output. The technical side of design, make it a little prettier. And then there's another big chunk, which is very critical, is how do you present your ideas? How do you tell stories about your ideas? And one of the critical things that I personally experience is that if you know how the story is being told with data, then you are more likely to producing something very useful. It's like data is not useful on its own. Data is really to support you to make an argument of some sort. If you are trying to convince somebody with a business action, if you're trying to make a pitch to your boss about something, you leverage data to support your argument. But if you just purely thinking about from the data scenario, I got in my data, I just visualize what is in the data, then I think we are losing a lot of the context of why we need data at the first place. So I would say, the first two things that you need to kind of learn for a long time and, through different courses. But in this particular session, I really wanted to talk about the technical side of the design and the presenting, a little bit presentation side. So we're not going to talk so much about the theoretical side. We mostly look into some examples, and then we're going to walk through it. And then we're going to do some critiquing and commenting about what works and what doesn't, and so that you can get some inspirations and then take away from home and see how you can learn from that. Another thing I wanted to touch very quickly is really about what's the best way to learn? And this is kind of come back to my personal approach. I do, in the past 5 years, I particularly when I was working for Tableau software, I spent about 15 hours, so 14 hours a day, really obsessively trying to dealing with design, really try on and experiment. Even here, I do a lot of teaching. 50% of my time is do teaching, and then the other 50% of my time actually working on projects. So I constantly practice the experiment. There's books and classes, blog posts you can read and write, and there's coworker doing something really cool you can learn from. Or some masters like Stephen Few, Edward Tofty. And then there's a lot of community members who create a lot of cool stuff in a community. You can really look and then see what kind of inspiration you can get, and to really kind of make yourself, more creative, and then learning more skills. This one, on the right portion, the feedback portion, is actually super, super important. I reflect back to how I learned myself. For several years, I would work on different projects, and then I have a panel of experts. They're visualization expert, they are design expert, they're user experience expert, and they sometimes a business expert. They were all coming together and they hammer on my work. They were critiquing me, they will give me feedbacks, and then I take this feedback and I improve it. On top of it, I also do a lot of critiquing to other people's work. If your coworker do some work, you help to critique that. And the reason this is very helpful to you is that if you learn how to critically see things, it will help yourself to critically think about your own project too. And really kind of put yourself into perspective. Like if you critique your coworker's work, you don't have all the context. You can really force yourself to be in the user perspective where you don't have a lot of context. That's exactly the scenario your user is going to be. If you produce something, you give it to somebody else to consume, they don't have the context you have. But if you can reverse your perspective and go critiquing other people's work, you put yourself in your user's shoes. So that really helps you to kind of switch perspective a little bit. And so that's kind of the things that we're going to do today. We're gonna look into some examples, and I want you to really put yourself into the user's shoes as a user. We're gonna look through that together. So I'm not sure how many people know about the data story gallery, and you can tell Jessica if you know about this. If you don't, I'm gonna just make an introduction in a second. I'm gonna give you a link to the website. So in our data story gallery, we have lots of good data visualization examples that's submitted by the community. A lot of people out there, they're just trying to show off and also teach the community about what can you do to make your visualization pop. I would say, all of the visualizations are not vetted. They're not critiqued by expert. They are not individually polished, but the author actually put a lot of effort to make this pop. So I wanted to go through a couple of examples, and so that we can really think critically about what element works really well and what element can be improved. So I'm going to look into two examples. The first example I want to look at is the storytelling and infographic design. And the second example I'm going to look at is the typical corporate analytics example. And then before I get started, I want you to think. So I'm thinking about these two questions. You don't have to answer these questions right now, but I'm going to ask you these questions again after we go through those two examples. The first question is, what's the difference between regular corporate data report and infographics? That's number one. And number two, what's the difference between regular corporate data reports and a storytelling style data report? So this is two questions. So thinking about it, I want to go through the two examples, and hopefully we can get these two questions answered at the end of our talk. So I'm going to switch my screen to these two examples. So here's the data story gallery. As you can see here, we have lots of really interesting data visualization examples. You can click anything and then just see what other people are doing. Here is our first example. I'm going to go ahead and maximize the screen. Okay, here's the first example we're going to look at. This is an infographic piece. This is also a storytelling piece. So as you can see here, the title is Master Your Productivity in 2007. I wanted you to focus on this particular title because this is actually bring to our later discussion about how you name your things. How do you lead your user and guide users, whether or not this name actually reflect the content. And then remember, they actually address your, which means it's supposed to really talk about you and how you can leverage the data to improve your productivity. Now let's see if the content deliver this promise of the title. Okay. Now here is the first visual we see. How important is productivity to happiness? Now we got this big visual, it's an infographic. If you thinking about, this is an infographic. If you think about using the same data point in the regular corporate report style, this is probably just a one bar chart, one bar, right? But because this is a presentation, they use infographic, they use this particular chart type. And then on the bottom, you can see the age group. Like in my case, I belong to this age group. I'm just like, oh yeah. But notice what happened. When I click my own age group, I already forgot what was the number point that is before I click it. Okay, now I have to go back and say like, oh yes, 93. Oh, myself is 94. What about the 22 years group? When I click this 22 years group, oh, 95%. But do I still remember my own number? Do I still remember what is my percentage in my age group and what's the percentage at the beginning, right? So this is the first question I want to raise to the group. Sometimes, how do you think about filters? And how do you really leverage the slicers for your visual? And also that comes down to what do you want to portray or what kind of message you want to do. So sometimes I think having filters are really, really good. But there are times having these filters actually not sufficient. Because your brain, thinking about like, I'm not, I don't have the best memory, but most people, but I would think my memory is average. But when you click around filters like this, people, most of the scenarios don't remember what the number is in the other part, when you click around. You can't really compare across different age groups. And I don't know what's my difference with other people's differences. So that's kind of the caution I want to raise to all of you on thinking about how do you use a filter. If I were to design this, I would actually have a supporting bar chart right on the side by side, and really have age group showing here so that I can not only clicking using the visual to click, but also kind of have comparison between my age group and other age group. And that's one thing I wanted to talk about. Now I go to the second page. What's the number one challenge to being productive? This is actually a really good one. You can see distraction, interruption, round 2, and time management, and other things. So this is actually really a neat presentation because you can see clearly what are the 5 things, 5 categories, even though the other doesn't give you much information. Let's say four really useful information points that you can take away. And then again, I have the same thing. I click to my own group. I see different data points, right? And I go here. So what would help you to increase your productivity? Now I go straight to my own age group because I don't care, I care more about myself. So I go to my own age group. And what happened here, this is a highlight function. So one thing I wanted to really make a point about the difference between highlight functions and the filter functions. When I highlight this, I got really confused. I'm like, oh, okay. Looks like I feels like I can almost read that, but the things that on the background really bothers me. It distracts me, and my eyes kind of can't really focus on my own bars. A lot of times. So if you want to really compare my own group with the average group, there's other chart type like bullet chart you could use. You can really kind of enable that comparison much more effectively. But if the comparison is not the focus, I think it might be beneficial to use a filter here. If you do a filter, you don't have this distraction anymore. I just focus on my own bars. If you really want to highlight the average, the difference between my age group and the average, you can have a different chart type really focused on that. So that's kind of another thing I want to raise here. What time of the day are you most productive? So this is another infographic chart type. So I really wanted to invite you to thinking about this. You can type your answers to Jessica if you wanted to, and how do you think about this chart type and how easy it is to read it. When I read it, I like fun stuff, but I also kind of wanted to be cautious about how this chart type represent your data correctly. Look at here. So I actually have to do some math to figure out how I read this chart. And luckily, there is one bubble that is exactly 10%. So it's like, oh yeah, evening 10%. Oh, which means the height of each bubble represents 10%. If it's not 4, it's 8%. Okay, this is a little bit 4, it's kind of a 12%. I think I'm able to figure it out, but it's not that easy and intuitive. I have to do some math and some mental work to get this out, to kind of understand this. But if you're thinking about a simple bar chart, compare with a simple bar chart. If it's a simple bar chart, you can possibly read it in 1 second without actually digest. Okay, what's this bars telling me? Why I'm looking at bubbles? Does the bubble represent something? There is a chart type. It's called dot chart, and dot chart is very valuable because each dot, it's the same format. You got you got a category data on the bottom, and you can get a value like sales or percentage, whatever you can get here, and then each bubble will represent a value. For example, a person or team or age group. In this particular example, I can really put this age group here. For a certain age group have a higher percentage and other age group don't have a higher percentage. So that way your bubble actually correlate with something, with your age group or with some certain categories. But in this particular example, the bubble doesn't correlate with any dimensions.
Right. Oh, sorry. I'm just going to chip in here and give some of the answers that people have said in live chat.
Perfect.
We asked about what we thought of this chart type. Daniel Stewart said it was slightly confusing but pretty, which I think is totally on point. The power user said it looks cool but took me a few seconds to get it. And Richard Vanderpool said the color usage is unfortunate and it should show a total of 100%, which I think is a good point.
Yeah, very, very good point. And I so appreciate it. So please keep doing that comment, and so that Jessica can read it out to all of the rest of our team, because this is very valuable for you to actually set up and thinking about how you think about this chart type. Very good points here. If this show up 100%, it might be make more sense. And the color usage, there's no legend. If there's a legend, it might help me to understand the color. Right now, I really don't know what the colors means. Okay, so that's the whole thing. And another thing I wanted to, so after we look at the whole thing, I want to invite you back to think about this again. So master your productivity in 2017, which means really addressing to you and the particular age group. And I want to mention this because I feel like, do I really get a lot of information about me? I think I get some information about me, but I actually have to click on my age group every single time, right? Whenever that happens, you're going to have to ask your question, how can I make it so that people open up, it will directly be about them? They don't have to click their age group every single time to see the information that relevant to them. So two things you can do. Number one thing, you can using URL filter. There's parameter you can pass with URL. When people, if you work in a corporate environment, for example, you're producing something for salespeople to use, and each of them are focused on different region, and you can pass in region region to your URL parameter. So when the salespeople open their things, it will directly zoom into theirs, right? That's one thing you can do it. The other thing you can do is really, here I actually have an example. There is a visualization published by New York Times a couple of years ago. So it's called How Your House and You Guys Talk. This is really interesting because this is actually a visualization based on your survey. So it's question number 1 out of 25. I'm only to do 1 so that you can see how this works. So how would you address a group of 2 or more people? So this is a kind of test your accent. Since I'm not American, so I wasn't born there, but I do know if people live in Texas, they use your. So now I'm gonna actually click the next button. And what happened is I got a little map right after I answer 1 question. So that's a visualization. So the more question you answer, it will zoom in the little heated point. That's where the system is trying to guess. The visualization is trying to detect where you come from. Now, I know like there's most people in Texas using the slang. So see that the map already identify you belong to this area. The more you answer questions, the more it will narrow down to where you come from. So I want to mention this because this is actually zoom into you. It's really about you. So here, I feel like, this visualization will be much better pop up if they can use similar logic into the visualization process. So think about it and see if you can come up with creative ideas. So with that, do we have any questions before we look into, or comments before we look into?
We had one more comment from Amar Malik about that last time slot productivity chart. He mentioned that it would be great if early morning or mid morning or any of the terms were associated with a time slot, because it doesn't really clearly say mid morning could mean 9 to 11 for some people. It could mean 9 to 9:30. It's hard to know what that means.
Yeah, very good point. Theoretically speaking, you can put a date function or like or hour function on the axis, and then you have categories underneath. Right? Basically, you have a timeline, show the time, and then overlap a category on top of it, and that will be much more precise. Yeah, really, really good point. Now let's look into the second example here. So we got Cheetos. Are we all familiar with Cheetos?
Oh, yes.
Okay, great. So now we're going to look at this. Okay, so yeah, please feel free to text Jessica about your first impression. What do you think about it? So when I look at this, I think, wow, this is actually pretty neat, very color, blue and black, really interesting color, from the beauty perspective, it's really decent. Has a really kind of good font. Layout is pretty decent. So I was like, yeah, this visualization actually make really good impression to me. Although most of the scenarios, in the corporate, for using a really colorful background is really used a lot in the marketing folks and marketing teams. And then also if you do any sort of public facing visualizations, so you can use a lot of colors to make the visualization really pop up. But if you ever work with financial data or work with CEOs or work with really high level management, I would say most of the scenarios we actually don't use that much color. So there's kind of a culture, general culture preferences there, depend on what audience do you serve. So I would say, from the marketing perspective, this is a really nice design.
Miranda, I'm just going to chip in here with some of the first impressions
Okay,
of our
great.
attendees right now. Our Banner 83 said that it was too dark. Daniel Stewart said, pretty, but where do my eyes go? Richard Vanderpool said, it doesn't like black backgrounds and no donuts, please, which I think is the circle chart comment. Nico Lagreste said, very dark. Looks like everyone's saying it's not a good visual. It's a little too dark.
Yeah, very good point. So, but I also wanted to give a comments about beauty. Beauty is subjective. When you look at it, you think, yeah, this is pretty. That person like, yeah, I'm not sure. I don't like blue. But data, so that's why I think if you approach information as the architect, you will really think about things differently. So if you're just like interior designers, like it's really dependent on the person, right? But if you're an architect, you structure the information right, you use the right chart type, and you think about information in the clarity perspective, and then that become much more solid. It less argument. Oh, I don't like the right color, So that's why for most of the time I actually don't debate with people with color choices. However, with good usage of color, you can highlight something much quicker. So I will see if I have a good examples later to talk about the color and the color usage and how can you leverage color to purposely design your visual instead of just for decoration or just for beauty. So let's look into the functionality. So let's say like, okay, first we talk about impression, then let's click around and let's look into the functionality. So first, this is like the right side. So I wanted to mention a little bit about mental models. Most scenarios, when we look at buttons like that on the left bar, discussion tendency, web resources, when we look at style of a design like this, our tendency is really to click it. I'm not sure if you have. If you do, let me know. So it's my personal experience. When I look at this, I'm like, what? I'm not able to click this? So for me, it's like it's inviting me to click, but when I click on it, it won't let me click. So that's kind of the frustrating number one. We're thinking about, if you're thinking about design improvement, this is the kind of where you can think about how can you improve this. If this is not clickable, how can you make it so that it doesn't feel like clickable? Here is the date functions. Like I should be able to click on the date functions. I'm not sure why it's not letting me. Not letting me click the date functions. Is that because the browser issue? Okay, let me change browser and see if I'm able to click on that. So I believe I tested beforehand. I think I can click it, but now I'm not able to click it.
Chat definitely agrees with your earlier point too about not being able to click on things.
Yeah. Awesome, thank you. Let's click on this. Oh yeah, it works. Okay, let's click on this. So this is still not clickable. On the right, left hand is not clickable, but we can click on the date. This data is actually a really neat design. Some people like it and some people don't like it. Now, I would say it's not a bad design. I mean, it's really nice and easy to click around, and it's right on the top. It's kind of pretty neat. Another thing I want to mention is really the donut chart. So if you look into any sort of community blog and expert blog, and a lot of people hate donut chart. So I would say there's The reason people still using donut chart is because either user like certain group segment of user like it, or some people just want to give this little different, but otherwise you just use a bar chart and line chart all the time, and what other choices I have. So I would say, even within our current palette, we have a lot of chart type available that you can make similar things without using the donut chart. And something possibly might be like this is kind of a summary a chart type. You can make a call out number, like just the data card to call out this several things. That's one thing. You can make a tree map. You can make a bar chart, and then you can make what other chart type there out there. So please chip in ideas. What would you do differently? What other chart type are you gonna use to replace this donut chart that can be really more meaningful? So this call out number on the bottom is pretty neat. I actually really like the little question mark. What I don't know is about how I'm gonna use this question mark. So I got this 40K mentions. Here's a little question mark. So I know sometimes when you design things like that, when I hover over, it should pop up something. Or when I click on it, it should pop up something. So it should have some sort of information. For me, this is supposed to suggest information. But now when I click on it, it doesn't do me anything. And when I hover, it doesn't do me anything either. So that's kind of misleading. I don't know what this for.
Miranda, we had a question. Nico Legrest asked, where would you put the year slicer? If you would put it on top of the month slicer or another location?
Yeah, so usually if I would do it, if you put on the top, it from the design perspective, it wouldn't look really pretty because your years are shorter. If you don't have like 3 years of data or 4 years data. So if I would put it, I would make the month slicer a little bit smaller and put the year data in front of it. Just on the left. So they are in the same row, and it show year first, and then it show the months. So basically in the same row, year on the left and months on the right.
Perfect.
Yep. And then, oh my Google height, the symbol is right here. Okay. Let's look into the second one. Wow, very slow. Okay. Apparently I jumped one.
For you asked about the replacing the chart, we had some suggestions of a horizontal bar chart and also a tree map.
Yeah, very good suggestion. Yep. And then you can still put in the same place, and they can still be visually appealing. If you design the layout and the little structure, and sometimes the bar chart can be small and tuck into that place, and they can be really informative. And then one nice thing I do here is like, even though I'm not clickable, it did let me highlight which session I'm actually looking at. That's kind of a little nice touch. But ideally, I would be able to, I'm talking about the left navigation bar. Ideally, it's clickable and highlighted. It would be really nice. But at least this is highlighted, so that's at least something. So let's look into this one. This one is similar design. But I'm not quite sure. Okay, the first session and the second session. Okay, let's go back. Okay, I talk about design, so we forgot looking into the meaning of the dashboard. So the first one, okay, discussion intensity. Okay, web sources. So basically, I would suggest like each tab has a title. So even though you have this kind of a navigator, but sometimes I think my habit is really looking at title on the top. It's like, what is this tab focused on? What exactly the group? Like if you go to Macy's, you have a children department, you have hardware department, you have men's department, you have shoes department. So there's like, visually grouping it. And I really kind of hope that we can leverage the title and headers a little bit to guide the users. What exactly the information I'm looking at on which segment, what exactly and also you can even take advantage of this title area to really highlight the stories in it, the insight that you see in the data. Like for example, this bar chart. Here's the mentions and reach, right? So instead of say a discussion intensity chart, well, this give you a category, but that really doesn't tell you anything about the data or what did you see from the data. So instead of using the title, you can actually change the title. Say, you know what, if I'm looking at this for Cheetos, what exactly the insight I can take away to help Cheetos marketing to do a better job with marketing. So like, oh yeah, look at this. So there's two peaks here. In March, and also March 11th. Okay, this is a kind of all in March. So if you look at the yearly data and see if there's any trend. So of course, this is only have a very short amount of data, don't have the yearly data. So at least you can, using the text box to annotate what's going on here. What exactly going on at this peak? So Tableau, Power BI lately released a new feature. This is called the data insight. I really highly encourage you test out. From here, I cannot do it, but if you using your desktop, you can really hover over and right click. You should be able to do a quick data insight. It will actually visualize what's going on, give you a breakdown about what's going on in this peak. So and also actually give you chart types to tell you what's going on with this peak, so you can find out more information about it. So please try it out, and it can be really handy. So that will really kind of help you to chase down the rabbit tail, what's going on. And if you do find out what's going on, then you use annotation. So the little peak here, you can use a little annotation, said, oh, I see what's going on here, what causes peak, or is there anything we should concern about this valleys? And is there anything we do right at this peaks? So to really help people to can make better decisions. So you can use in your little title area to really highlight that. Highlight what is the number one, if people walk away with one sentence, what can they take away from the data? So that's something like I really encourage all of you to thinking about. How can you really surface that insight with your data visualizations? So let's go to the second one. Web sources. It's like which sources all this mentioning is come from. As you can see, Twitter is the largest. I'm actually just gonna click around and see how the behavior is. Okay, so this is another thing I wanted to mention again. I think we have a similar issue as the previous chart type. This is the highlight functions. When you do highlight functions like this, and notice what happened. So the highlight point, the light green supposed to be the actual data I see from Twitter, but because the dark green actually really similar to light green, it makes me feel about stack bar chart. I don't know if you have the same experience as I do. A lot of times you have this stacked bar chart that have different colors. Whenever I see this highlight function, I always think about that stacked bar chart. I'm like, what exactly I'm looking at? Which I don't really know which portion are considered as highlighted. As the other portion should be completely grayed out, that you really don't confuse that grayed out portion with the highlighted bars. So that's something I wanted to raise this again and again, and hopefully when you do your design and thinking about it, thinking about how can you help your customers to read the data without confusing them whether or not which portion of the bar is supposed to be the bar they are looking at. So here again, we have another donut chart. And then the thing I want to mention one more time about donut chart is if you really, like if your customers are a big donut fan, and then they ask you 100 times and you must put a donut on your visual, then at least put the data point on it. Put the percentage, put the category data on, and put label on it. Well, if you put label on it, at least they will be a little bit more readable. And if you have a donut leg with no label, it's super hard. And another thing is about this portion. on the right has the little indicators. Oh, there's a major call out numbers. I really like the call out numbers. That's really neat. You can see about how many blogs there is, how many Facebook mentioning, how many forums, the news. This is really neat. One thing I do want to comment is really about the little donut usage about percentage on the far right. So you got little donuts like 1%, 1.1%. This is all. Supposedly it should be a donut chart with a little 1% indicated, but here I feel like it's almost not really useful to me because the 1% is actually means nothing. Here on the donut it shows nothing. This 1.1% shows nothing, and 0.2 shows nothing, and then suddenly you got you upgrade to like 2.9. I finally see a little streak of light, and then 0.6 nothing. And then you move to 90%, and suddenly you show this big lit up donut. I mean, it's like when situation like this, I almost feel like this is not really useful. The visual here is really not doing much in terms of my consumption of data. Because I'm really saying nothing. I actually more confusing. I'm like, what? Why is 1% nothing? Why is this circle? What is this circle is doing here? I didn't even know it was a donut until I actually see the 90% here. So feel free to comment on this, and Jessica can read out your comments, and I would love to hear how you think about this. Okay, should we move to the next one? Okay, so this one. This one, I do want to mention a little bit about the dark and the contrast. So even though we don't, I try to not talk about subjectively which color is beautiful, but however, contrast is one of the key things if you work with color at all. You look at this bar. So the main portion of this bar on the top is actually gray. So when you have a dark background, like black background, try to use some light color. Otherwise, your bar is disappearing. There's a little big block of gray. It doesn't pop up anymore. So try to using some bright color, the white, blue, use some color so that your data, your bars pop up. That's kind of one thing that you can consider to improve.
Just to chip in here, Miranda, Urbano83 made the point that it's dark and hard to look at and looks like an audio plugin, which I think seems accurate. Richard Vanderpool said that donuts are meant for eating only, which sounds delicious. I haven't had breakfast yet. And we also had a question about your philosophy for enabling data values on your charts. Do you think it's always a good idea to have data values, or is there times when it's not appropriate?
Well, I would see in most of the scenarios, I mean, it's really depends on your own scenario. So I think usually it really depends on your purpose. So if you're thinking about, okay, it's very important for my audience to read the numbers, then it's very important to keep the numbers on, keep the data labeled on. But there are times you don't want people to focus on specific values. You really want them to focus on the generic trend. For example, one good example I can give to you is really the heat map. If you're really thinking about heat map, can I have let's see if I can find examples about heat map. Heat map. So heat map really, the interesting things about heat map, even heat map a lot of times is really focused on showing where the heat is or where exactly the trend is. So this one, you see a heat map. Personally, me is thinking, oh gosh, I can detect where exactly the higher value is, the low value is, but I'm not really seeing the numbers. If you're working with financial people or people who really want to know what those numbers are, I think you can really do combination of heat map and an actual labels. Otherwise, people get really frustrated. And it's like, yeah, I see the heat, but I don't really know what this value, what the values are. That can get really frustrating. So I would say if whenever you can, try to put labels on, but every now and then you will come across situations you really don't need it. So that's kind of, I have to find some really specific examples for you in terms to judge. I'm going to write the notes down in case, I can find some examples for next future sessions.
Sounds good.
Really good question. Okay, let's go back here. Did I? Okay, I'll get so many browsers open. Which one is the one we're looking at? So I believe it's this one. Okay. Okay, so another thing I want to comment on is really the chart on the bottom. The chart, this can be a really nice heat map. You can use a heat map. This little bubble chart type can be fine too. But one thing I wanted to point out is a label. If you look at the label Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, the label is actually stacked on top of the visual right now. So my guess is probably they somehow couldn't find out how to put the label there, and then you overlap some sort of text on top of it and hope that the label will align with the visual, but they don't. So that's another thing I want to mention. Like whenever you design something using a little trick and hack to put labels on, and when you publish it, always double check. Because what happened is when you do use a little trick, for example, certain things you cannot combine two chart types together. You use some tricks and hiding some axes, and you combine them together so that you hope that they can be one chart. But after you publishing it, things got moved around quite a bit. So always test it before you actually walk away, because this is exactly what happened. There's a chart, the label stack on top of the visual, which is I suppose not see it. Okay, we have 13 more minutes, and so let me quick go through the last few tabs, and then we'll get our initial question answered. So look at this one. Online influencers. So this is all the influencers. Okay. One thing I realized what's going on with this bar chart, you got a little bullet here, and then the name is on this side. So this is a little bit, please type your comments on this one too and see how you think about it. But when I look at this, I'm like, what is this bullet for? What this does to me? I don't know. I don't really know what this bullet is going to help me understand this chart any better. In fact, it's habit of reading chart. I always want to see the name here on the left side. But then the name is on the right side. When you put the name on the right side, what happens is this. When I read it, then okay, oh yeah, because there's big empty space at the second level of the bar. On the first bar, I can align them decent. The top bar, the bar on the top, so that's number 8, Lola. So yeah, I can align them pretty good. And then the more further down I go, I'm like, oh, ALV Avis 182, which this bar is. If you have different numbers, luckily this is all 2. So it's like if I make a mistake to align them up, I can still pretty assume I got the right answer is 2. Otherwise, if assuming this bar chart has different numbers, okay, and then it's like I have to use my mouse to draw a connection all the way from the headers to the bar so that I can be sure that I'm reading the right bar. So that's why I think from the design perspective, that's something we should really consider. How easy it is for your user to read your information. Not about how fancy it is, but it's really how easy it is for your user to make the pieces together and to understand it. So I really think this is something we can improve on. Other places I think is decent. If you have other comments, and let me know. Yeah, this one looks like I can click around. Neutral. Okay, so the bottom you get a summary when you click around. Okay, that's not bad. Okay, another thing I don't really understand is the bottom right. I don't really know the followers, the influencer followers. Like, is this a total followers? Why is there 3 numbers? I don't really understand why is there 3 numbers. Is that a follower per person or follower total? Or if follower total, it should be 1 number instead of 3 numbers. I don't think this is actually give me enough information for me to know what these numbers are.
And Chad has pointed out that there's poor contrast with the labels, and also that this design makes it more difficult to analyze the data rather than spending time finding your way around.
Thank you. Great comments. Yep. Okay, we're going to move a little faster on this so that we can answer our questions I raised earlier. So this one, similar comments, contrast, and then the gray bar doesn't show up really well.
Just quickly, Miranda, we had a great question from Ian, noticing that this dashboard in particular uses lots of clip art with little icons and whatnot. And how do you feel about that in principle?
Usually, I would not use it myself. But if you really love clip art, you want to decorate your stuff, as long as you don't compromise the content of your visual, it doesn't serve as a distraction, then I don't object to it. Particularly if you're doing marketing related stuff, or you're doing public related stuff, then it probably, some public, particularly, depending on your audience group. If your audience group is moms, just like any people on the street, right? Not just like proper corporate BI professionals or corporate CEOs. Something fun can be nice. In fact, when I was working in my past job, there's always 2 different. Even right now, if you're thinking about all the visualization gurus, you can think about Stephen Field, right? Stephen Field is really minimalist. So he said, data is data. It should not be art. There shouldn't be any consideration. If anything that take away, if you can use a bar chart, always use a bar chart. Never use any other chart types. No beauty involved. And then you got Edward Tofte, who is really information design. He actually includes a lot of different, more than business. So Stephen Field focused a lot on business visual designs, and then Tofte actually focus on a lot more broad, like any mapping, like or information display at the train station. And then you got this, lately there's a lot of data journalism, like Caro, Alberto Caro, he wrote 2 books about the functional art, and he also wrote another book about, I forgot the name of it. So he, and also there's a group of others who really focus on the infographics, and actually that's the question I'm going to raise later. So let's move. We're almost done with the critique, looking at the examples. So I thought we would talk this together. And then you got this data journalism, who really wanted to marriage the art with the function and having a little fun, like almost like a spoonful of sugar to your data. So I would say, if you can make it beautiful without being distracting, that's the master. That's the ideal. That's the best. So now let's look back, and I actually want to ask you these 2 questions. So please type your answers to Jessica so that she can read it out. What do you think is the difference between regular corporate data report and infographics?
Going to be a little delay while this transmits. I just will say a previous comment. Richard Vanderpool mentions that icons should support the data. There's also a comment that icons can convey more information than just typing into text boxes. So I think it sounds like a case-by-case thing.
Yeah.
All right, I'm waiting for chat to catch up on our stream. So let's hear what's the difference between regular corporate data report and infographics, and what's the difference between the styles? I think people are rapidly typing. While we're getting people to type, let me just ask you another quick question, Miranda. Someone asked about incorporating their company branding into their dashboards. Do you have any sort of guidelines for that?
Yes, in fact, in my team, we're doing similar things. Mostly because I think if you do some sort of a visualization design to customers, for example, if your customers have for example, you support your customers and your customer also have other channels to get the data. So in those scenarios, it's very important for you to brand yourself. When they look at the report coming from you, by looking the style and then the general brand and the logo, they will know exactly this is from you. And so that actually can be really nice. It's a branding issue. Like internally in Microsoft, we use a lot of we have a lot of product lines. You got Xbox, you get Office, you got Azure. So you got so many different teams. So because we have so many different reports, it's really difficult to identify what report is what where if you don't use any logo or branding. Like everything's a plain text, right? So for that reason, we actually in our team we support the fact to using product logos as our template. So for example, if you do some business analysis for Xbox, put the Xbox logo on it. So and then that way every time we look at people look have a glance and they say, oh yeah, this is for Xbox. So there's different ways you can do and internally and externally. So if you do the really subtle, I think that can be a really good thing.
Great. So we had an answer to our question earlier. Urbano83 says that I think the audience defines the design and intention. And Richard Vanderpool says that infographics are meant for explaining the result of an exploratory analysis in an attractive way. And the corporate reporting is meant for serious decision making.
Yeah, that's very good. So I'm going to answer this question. So please also, if you able to multitask and answer your second question, what's the difference between regular corporate report and a storytelling star report? So that's kind of two slightly different questions, but somehow related. So I'm going to really go ahead because we only have 3 minutes left. So I'm actually go ahead to summarize this and by kind of showing my experience and my opinions on this. So I think the corporate report is, it's very serious. Is sometimes it would drive a lot of decision making, and it's usually for professionals. And in infographics are heavily used by data journalism, the public and the data journalism, and the so I would say, and some sort of marketing folks also use that, and if they have public facing audience, really is the infographic is a little bit easier to understand and slightly more decorative and a little more graphic design element in it. So I would say most of the time in the corporate BI reporting, we don't really need to, because a lot of times it take a lot of time to design infographic related graphs. With the corporate report, it's a lot faster. I would say if you want to make a really quick impact in the business setting, it possibly makes sense for you to spend more of your time to analyzing the business than to spend a lot of time to figure out all the fancy ways to produce infographics. That's kind of one thing I wanted to comment. The second thing I want to comment is really infographics is actually it can work really well in presentation format, like you're doing PowerPoint presentations or you're doing some sort of presentation with Power BI directly. So certain presentations can be really beneficial to use the infographic because you don't need a lot of if you just stick one bar on a single slide, it doesn't really look pretty. But if you have an infographic, you fill most of the slide. It can be really helpful. You just want to make a point about something. That can be really helpful. Third thing I want to really comment on is really storytelling versus general report. A lot of times, I mentioned earlier, is like if you're trying to make a point about something, you're using data to support your point. It's really an argument, and then you use data to support your argument. So that's why I think storytelling is so important. And sometimes when you tell stories or doing presentation, you might actually using multiple reports. You depending on what kind of argument you're trying to make, you might actually draw data from 5 or 6 different reports that support whatever argument you're trying to make. So this is really, really different scenarios. So I really support all of us to thinking about, okay, if I'm going to make a presentation to a CEO or a presentation to a particular segment of my management, what should I say? Should I just directly bring my report over, or should I actually make a PowerPoint presentation that I draw data from somewhere and make a particular argument about it? So I saw we are hitting our time limit, so I try to stop.
That was perfect summary. Thank you so much, Miranda. This was an excellent presentation. Thank you to you. Thank you to our chat. You guys were really interactive today, and it was a lot of fun. We're going to wrap this up now. Thank you very much for attending. My colleague Chuck Sterling does webinars every Tuesday and Thursday, so keeping your eye on powerbi.com/blog to stay up to date on all our webinar stuff. And thank you, everyone, for attending. And thank you, Miranda.
Thank you.
Bye.